Hello and welcome to this evening's PRISM webinar, Applying PRISM to Achieve Common Financial Goals, presented by Charles Rotblut, creator of the PRISM Wealth Building Process. My name is Jenna Brashear, your host for this evening, and we want to thank you all for attending. During our presentation, Charles will demonstrate how PRISM functions by working through a common financial goal, helping pay for a grandchild's college education. Using this example, you'll see a wealth building plan completed from start to finish. And plus, you'll learn how to create your own personalized wealth building plan in the process. And I want to preface tonight's presentation by reminding our viewers that AAII is a nonprofit educational group and is not a financial advisor, and thus is not able to give personal advice. Every investor is different. That's why our goal with each broadcast and article is to educate you on how to make better financial decisions. And if you have questions for Charles or I, please feel free to send them in via your GoToWebinar control panel, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you experience any issues with the audio or the video of tonight's webinar, please consult the instructions on how to change your device's settings, or you can consult the GoToWebinar website for support at gotowebinar.com. And a copy of Charles' slides is available under the handout section of your GoToWebinar control panel, located also on the right-hand side of your screen. And also a friendly reminder that this presentation is recorded and a replay of the webinar will be available tomorrow on AAII's YouTube channel, along with links to this presentation's handouts, as well as any resources we discuss. And for new viewers, we like to give a little background about our organization. So the American Association of Individual Investors is an independent nonprofit corporation formed in 1978 for the purpose of assisting individuals in becoming effective managers of their own assets through programs of education, information, and research. And additionally, if you're new to PRISM, the PRISM process, or the Academy, I want to give you a bit of background information. The PRISM Wealth Building Process is a 5-step course that provides investors with a framework for aligning their investment decisions with their goals. So following the 5 steps of PRISM empowers you to create a personalized investment plan and gives you the confidence to follow it. And after the presentation, if you want to join the online PRISM Academy, you can visit aai.com/learnandplan to get started and see a full syllabus of the entire program. The PRISM Academy is free, and it's an added benefit for all AAII members. And as I mentioned before, today's webinar is an interactive event. Therefore, we will be answering questions as well as talking about different various topics throughout the broadcast. So feel free to submit any questions, any comments any time during the event. And so without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's presentation. The floor is yours, Charles.
Thanks, Jenna. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We try to schedule this so it wouldn't interfere with any World Cup games, for those of you who are soccer fans. But today we're going to talk about PRISM, and really I'm going to walk you through a plan. I'm actually going to use the example of a retired couple wanting to help their grandkids with college. But what I would encourage you to think about is really the process and kind of the higher level about how this all works together versus a specific goal. But I did choose this because when I first started AAII, I did have people come up to me and say, you know what, I really want to help with my grandkids' college expenses. And I've heard from several members over the years that's one of their financial goals. So I'm using this as an example, but there's certainly many different goals and many different ways you can use PRISM. This is just a very simple, easy to understand example. But again, kind of focus on how this all gels together and how you can, and think about how can you adapt it for your own personal situation, because we want PRISM to be very adaptable. We want people to really make it their own financial plan and tailor it to their own goals and their own preferences. And so what PRISM really is, it's a framework. We have worksheets, we have videos, we have lessons in the PRISM Academy, but it really, at the end of the day, it's a framework for getting you from whatever your goal is to funding that goal and managing your portfolio. It's really designed to take your investment decisions and wrap them around your goals and your preferences and your ability to tolerate risk and any restrictions you may have on what you can invest in. So it's not really something that you say do A, B, and C. It's really something, here's a framework, follow it, and then adapt it to your needs and update it throughout your life. So it's not a one time and you're done. It's really something you can use continuously over time and change it as your goals change and change it as your risk tolerance change and as your wealth change. So think about this as a broad framework, not something where you need to just do A, B, and C, but really something more holistic. And the 5 steps of PRISM really are these: prioritizing your goals. We'll talk about this. Recognizing your risk tolerance and allocation, identifying your investment management preferences, selecting and managing your investments, and then finally monitoring. So at a very high level, it really is, what goals are you trying to meet? What is your ability to tolerate volatility and risk in your market, to risk of a shortfall in terms of your portfolio? What type of allocation strategy can you stick with? What preferences do you have? Some of you watching might really want to roll up your sleeves and get into picking individual stocks. Others of you might really like to hold index funds. And some of you might have some constraints. For instance, when we talk about saving for college, we're going to talk about 529 plans. In that case, there could be a restriction on what you can invest in. Managing investments really the rules. And that comes down again to comes down to preferences. If you're a value investor, you're going to have different rules than someone who, say, uses technical analysis or who uses index funds. And finally, the monitoring process is really not so much just looking at your balance, but really seeing how your portfolio is evolving, but also how's your life evolving, and has there been changes in your goals? Has there been changes in your life itself that would cause you to really evaluate your PRISM plan? So again, this is really a framework we're giving you to help create your own decisions, to create your own rules, to create your own guidelines. And I just want to say the whole reason why we start with goals is that if you simply write down your goals, you're going to have a much greater chance of achieving them. There was a study up by Dominican University that said if you just merely write down your goals, you increase your odds of achieving them by 42%. And if you have a plan for reaching those goals, it increases. For instance, actually this time last year, I got a letter from the Chicago Marathon saying that I had been selected. So the Chicago Marathon, even though they have about 40,000 people running the race, they actually hold a lottery to see if you'll actually get in. And if you don't get in a lottery, there's other avenues, but that's a primary way. And so this time last December, I got an email saying that I had been selected. Ironically, they're actually sending out these emails for the 2023 marathon. Those are going out today. But at that point in December 21, I knew, okay, my goal is to run the Chicago Marathon. I had a time in mind. But after I got this email, I started thinking through, okay, what do I need to do? Working backwards, what do I need to do the marathon in the time I wanted to? So really within a couple of weeks of doing this marathon, I actually developed my full training schedule. So I knew at what point I needed to specifically switch to marathon training mode versus just general running. As you can see, last October, you see that picture on the right, that little blue arrow, is me crossing the finish line. My finish time, for those of you who are curious, was actually 4 hours and 54 minutes, which was within the goal I had set for myself, which is under 5 hours. So really happy with that time. The time, I will say, you see on the clock, the 6 hours. If you're wondering what you just said, you ran it in 4:54 and the clock says 6:04. I'll just point out that is race time. I actually did not start for over an hour afterwards, after the professionals, the elites, started. So because it's 40,000 people, they have a staggered start versus having a stampede of 40,000 people at once. But again, it just goes to show you that if you have a goal, if you write it down and then you develop a plan for realizing it, you're going to greatly increase your odds of success, regardless if it's financial, if it's running, maybe it's something else. Maybe it's dieting. Maybe you want to have a trip to, you always want to go to Switzerland, or whatever your goal is. If you write it down and you create a plan, you're going to be more likely to realize it. And I'll add, when I was younger, I used to race bikes, and I was once at a coaching seminar, and a coach came out and said, if you really want to achieve a goal, tell everybody you know that this is your goal and this is what you want to reach, because all of a sudden you'll be a lot more accountable, because everyone's going to ask you, hey, how are you doing on that? What's your progress on that? So again, it's another way you can actually make yourself accountable and really take a step further towards reaching your goal. But even if you do, you still need that written plan. And again, it goes across fields. It's not just investing. But let's talk about PRISM specifically, and let's talk about financial goals, not running. And so in this case, we're going to use a hypothetical couple. We'll call them Bob and Jane. And their goal is to pay for their grandchild's college education. And so we'll assume they have 2 grandchildren. And we'll assume they recently retired and they've got some savings. They're pretty affluent, $1.5 million. And they're going to use PRISM specifically to focus on paying for their grandchildren's college expenses. And we're going to assume in this case, they have a pension, they've got Social Security, they've got enough income coming in that they don't necessarily need to worry about withdrawals. They feel pretty confident they have their retirement, their living expenses covered. But I will point out, college expenses though is really important to a lot of grandparents and to a lot of parents. And I understand there's always the desire to help your children and help your grandchildren reach their goals. But from a financial standpoint, if you're not taking care of yourself first, you're not helping anybody else. So it's really important to make sure you always put yourself first with your goals and then concentrating on helping other people. Because if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not helping other people. And I realize it's a tough decision, and sometimes it does mean you may do less for people you really care about than you want to, but it's really important to have that viewpoint. And with parents and a mother-in-law who are either close to 90 or 90, I understand how that makes tough trade-offs sometimes, but you do always want to make sure you're financially secure, because that's the best way you can help the ones you care about the most. Now, again, with PRISM, we start off with prioritizing your goals. And so why do we start with goals? So I talked about a little bit about formalizing the plan, but I also like to think about it in terms of purpose. If you have a purpose for what you want to do with your money, you're going to make more decisions. So you might say, well, my goal is to have as much wealth as possible. Well, that's nice. And certainly more wealth is better than less wealth. And it's certainly better than no wealth. But if you have a reason why you want to accumulate money, if you have a reason what you want to do with your money, it's going to give you motivation to management in ways that'll help you achieve your goals. So for instance, maybe you want to give a lot to your congregation, and that's fine. Then that can actually affect your investment decisions. It can affect your spending decisions. You're going to be more disciplined and more likely to achieve that goal if there's a purpose and a reason why you want to achieve it. It helps you visualize what that goal is, and it helps drive you towards that decision. And in fact, there's studies showing when they take a younger person and they show an older version of themselves, they actually save more for retirement because they get that purpose. They start envisioning, oh, this is what I'm going to be like when I'm older, and what kind of life do I want for myself when I'm older? So again, just having that visualization of what you're trying to accomplish helps you reach that goal. But the other thing from a financial standpoint, when you set goals, then you start thinking about, okay, well, how much is this goal going to cost me? How much time in the future how much time is it between now and then when I'm going to reach that goal? So for instance, when I got that note about running the marathon, I knew, oh, I got this in December. I've got 10 months. And really when I backtracked from the training, I realized, well, I had about 4 months to sleep on the couch and about 5 months where I had to get serious about it. So you start breaking things up in that type of viewpoint. But you also think about your spending duration. And the reason why I talk about spending duration is you might be someone who's willing to withstand a lot of volatility, and you might embrace Jim Clunan's view that volatility is not risk, but it's really risk is the long-term chance of you not having enough money to fund your goals. But once you get close to your goals, then you do need to start considering about risk, because you want to make sure you don't have a sudden drop right as your goal is about to hit that's going to cause you to fall short. But you also want to be conscious about what kind of volatility can you handle psychologically. And some people are very good about embracing volatility, Other people aren't so good. So you want to factor that in in terms of when you want to reach your goal. And certainly if your goal is long-term, then you should realize that volatility is not your biggest enemy. It's the risk of not having enough money because you didn't grow your portfolio at a rate in excess of inflation versus say, your goal in 3 years is to have a new car. Then you have to realize, well, you might be able to psychologically take on a lot of volatility in the stock market, but if the market recovers now and all of a sudden 3 years from now, you're about to make the down payment on a new car and there's another bear market happens, you may not have that down payment, or perhaps you may have to switch, say, from a Mercedes or a BMW to a Toyota or a Honda. And the Toyotas or Hondas are really nice cars. I drive a Honda Accord, but if your goal was to have that nice BMW, that brand new BMW, then you're obviously not reaching your goal. So this is why when we start with goals, the timing, what you're hoping to do, the purpose, all that plays a role in all your other investment decisions and how you're actually going to structure your portfolio to reach those goals. So let's at Bob and Jane's goals. So we said about their goal was to they're recently retired, and we talked about how it's really important to put yourself first financially. So in this case, Bob and Jane, their goal is the primary goal is paying for retirement. But again, they think they have enough from Social Security and pension to cover their living expenses. So that allows them to start thinking about their secondary goals. In their case, their secondary goals are actually help out with their grandchildren's college expenses. And we're going to assume they have 2 grandchildren. One is approximately 10 years old right now, and the other child is 6 years old. So a little separated away. And so we're going to assume that their 2 primary goals after retirement are going to help pay for the kids' college expenses. And then hopefully as a tertiary goal, they're going to hope that there's money left over that they can leave an inheritance for their kids and for their grandchildren. So given that they feel like they have retirement covered, let's talk about their college expenses and how they're going to help out their grandchildren. So they're going to start out by realizing, okay, we have this time frame. We know that the first grandchild, the older grandchild, is going to hit college in about 8 years. The second grandchild is going to hit college in about 12 years. And obviously, that's assuming their grandchildren go right from high school to college and don't take a so-called leap year. We're going to make some simple assumptions here. So let's start off. So once you know your goal, the first question is, well, how much risk can you take and what should be the proper allocation for your goals? Now with risk, you need to think about, again, when will you need to withdraw money from your portfolio? What's your tolerance psychologically to handle volatility between now and then? And then once you hit that spending duration, what is it? And so the idea with the risk is, the reason why I bring psychological ability, mathematically, I can make a really strong argument that if your goal is long-term, you should be taking a very aggressive stance with your portfolio. You should be almost fully allocated to stocks. But if you're someone who gets nervous when there's a bear market, then you need to think about perhaps you have a less aggressive allocation because you may actually get a higher return by taking on less risk. If that less risky allocations one you can stick with versus that very risky portfolio is one that you're going to jump out of every time there's a bear market like we're experiencing this year. And so that varies per person, and we'll get into how you can assess that. Then with allocation, obviously, so what is that mix of assets? What's that mix of stocks, bonds, and cash? And obviously, you can expand and include other assets. I'm going to start off by using stocks, bonds, and cash because the average investor struggles just to get that basic mix of stocks together. And some of you watching this might be like, oh, I'm good with that. I want to include commodities. I want to perhaps you're very aggressive. You want to consider futures contracts or crypto. You're not locked into an allocation we're going to show you with PRISM. Again, this is an adaptable framework you can tie into your own portfolio. But for Bob and Jane, let's look at their risk tolerance. And so this is our risk tolerance questionnaire that kind of guides you some of the key things that might influence your tolerance for risk. And one of the things is, how far in the future is your goal? Is it very soon, say less than 5 years? Is it far out? Maybe it's 20 years. In this case, we're going to assume intermediate because the first grandchild, the older grandchild, is going to be college age within 8 years. So we're going to assume it's a moderate time frame, meaning they have some ability to withstand bear markets, but bear markets historically have occurred about once every 4 years in the market. And so it's a possibility that we look at 8 years, they could hit 1 or 2 bear markets between now and then. Over what time period are you going to spend money? So again, you have the time to your goals reach, but then you also have a separate time frame, which is really your spending horizon. And for college, hopefully it's really short. Hopefully it's just 4 years. But for instance, if we were talking about retirement, you could be talking about 20 or 30 years. If we're talking about buying a car, it could almost, or a trip, it could be a very short spending duration. So depending where your goal is, you're looking at almost a through path, which means you hit your goal and then there's some extended period afterwards that you're still going to withdraw from your portfolio. Or is it going to be a 2 path where you hit your goal, and at your goal, the time your goals reach, you're going to spend everything at once? That influences your allocation decisions. Finally, how much wealth are you going to withdraw? And the reason we put this in there is, if whatever your goal amount is, or relative to your full portfolio, if you're going to spend it all at one time, and a perfect example was, there was several years ago, there's a gentleman who went to Las Vegas, cashed out all his savings. This is a true story. Went to a roulette table and bet it all. I think he bet it all in black, if my memory is correct. His whole savings. This is a case where his risk was really high. Not only was he gambling, but he was taking everything he had. And he actually won. Now, we do not recommend this strategy to anybody, but it's an example how if you're going to spend all your wealth at once, then you do have a high amount of risk at the time your goals reach. But if you're going to spend a small percentage of your wealth on that goal, then you actually have a high risk tolerance, because if you have a shortfall in terms of what you've allocated to your goal, but that what you've allocated to that goal is a small percentage of your total wealth, you can pull more out of your wealth to help fund that goal. So a good example is a down payment. Whereas if you have a lot saved, but the down payment's a smaller percentage of what you have saved, perhaps you have savings you can dip into to perhaps make up for that shortfall in a down payment on a house. So that's a timing component. The financial and psychological risk then is different. So you may be able to take on a lot of risk from the timing standpoint, but psychological standpoint, maybe you can't take on a lot of volatility, maybe you can't. And so we asked you a few questions. One, how have you reacted to past drops in the market? Because I believe we can show you a chart saying your portfolio might drop X percent, and you might answer it a certain way. But if we give you that same question on another day, you may answer it differently. But if you go back and look how you reacted to the current bear market and past bear markets, it'll give you more insight to what you really do when your nerves start really getting at you and Mr. Market's throwing you a loop. So we encourage people to think about what have they done in the past and use that as a guide. The other question is, relative to non-portfolio income, how much are you spending? So if this is a case where you can actually cover some of your spending from non-portfolio income, perhaps against a security, pension income, maybe you're working, that also gives you greater ability to tolerate risk because you have another source you can cover shortfalls with. Follow your knowledge of investing concepts. I'm a believer that people who understand market history, understand what normal market cycles are, and understand that bear markets and really even pullbacks are part, and corrections are part of a normal part of market, a normal part of the market, a normal part of the market cycle, are more likely to understand how to react to them and more likely to be willing to write through them. So that's our logic for the knowledge. And so based on this, we assign 2 components: what's your timing risk and what's your financial and psychological risk. And this is on this recognizing your risk tolerance worksheet. So for Bob and Jane, we assume based on their scores that they actually have here, right here, almost a high tolerance for risk from a financial psychological standpoint, but an intermediate timing risk because obviously college is going to be coming up in 8 years, and then hopefully they'll only be spending on 4 years. So this puts them right at the edge in terms of allocation choices between moderate to aggressive. And in this case, they can choose, yeah, I'll follow more of a moderate approach, I'll follow more of an aggressive approach, or they could go in the middle. So in this case, in terms of recognizing an allocation, once you know your goal and once you know your timing risk, you can then decide what's the correct allocation for you. And to give you a guide, these are our asset allocation models, and these are on our website at aai.com/asset allocation. We have an aggressive, a moderate, and a conservative. Now we assume for Bob and Shane, they're willing to take the aggressive investor allocation, in part because what they're going to actually help out with college, it's still a low amount relative to the total wealth. Now these allocations will actually give, on that page, will actually give you what our allocations are. The aggressive allocation is really about 90% into equities and 10% in fixed income. What I will tell you though, is these allocations are just a model. An allocation is almost like if you go into a clothing store and you want to buy a suit or you want to buy a really nice gown or dress. You can buy one off the rack and you can have an alternate. It'll fit you pretty well, but it won't fit you as well as a completely custom suit or a completely custom dress. So the same thing with the allocation. These models are really good to follow and they work well, but there never will be as good as a completely custom allocation. So you have your choice with PRISM. You can use these, or you can say, okay, these are decent guidelines, but I want to create my own allocation. So again, PRISM is very customizable, but these give you some guidelines that you can base your decisions on. Now, as we said, Bob and Jane chose an aggressive allocation. Now, one thing I will say, that the first grandchild was older, or both grandchilds were older, say the first grandchild was, say, was a senior in high school, and the younger grandchild was perhaps, heading in towards high school, they may need to think about a more conservative allocation because the spending horizon is that much closer. So again, time to when you need to spend and the period over which you need to spend has an influence of your allocation, and that's driven by the timing of your goals. So once you understand your allocation, then it's just a matter of like plugging it in. And plugging it in, it really comes down to not just selecting investments, but taking a step back and asking yourself, well, what kind of investments are you going to choose? And for some of you, it's going to be pretty obvious. But the reason why we start off with this is that, first of all, we know there's different types. AI members invest differently, have different types of preferences. Some of you are active stock pickers. Some of you love to do that, and that's great. But others of you are more are mutual fund investors, or ETF investors. But even still, regardless of what your preferences and what you like to do, some of you may have actually restrictions. My colleague Jack is writing about target date funds for the January issue. For some, we took a look at some of the fun things, and one of the things we looked at some of the fun offerings, and one of the things we looked at was the Thrift Savings Plan at TSP. For those of you who have never worked for the government, that's basically the government retirement plan, and you have basically a very limited number of fund options. And so in that case, you have to choose from that. Those of you with a 401k know there's a menu in mutual funds, and even though you might like to select individual securities, you're locked into those funds because that's what's offered by your plan. So when we think about how you're going to pick investments and what your rules should be, you do need to consider, are there constraints you have? And some of you might not have any constraints. If you're retired and you've got a brokerage account, the world's almost your oyster in terms of what you can invest in. But some of us do have restrictions. So just keep those in mind. And again, this is very personal. It may differ for each person reading this. So when we thought about Bob and Jane, they wanted to use a 529 plan. So you see where I have this green box. In this case, they do have constraints. And so although they might want complete control, they realize because they're investing in a 529 plan, they're going to be limited to what the offerings are in that 529 plan. That's not a question of good or bad. It's a question of, this is my constraint. I need to adapt my rules, my investment rules, my investment selection rules to that constraint. So we're going through different things, asking you, I try to get you to really think about what kind of investor are you? and what kind of constraints you are. Because if you're a person, you're going through this and you think to yourself, you know what, I really just like broad-based ETFs, then you shouldn't be worried about how to pick stocks. You should really focus on broad-based ETFs. But if you're like, you know, I'm a small cap value person all the way, then going through this exercise helps you realize that when someone's on CNBC talking about large cap stocks, that's really background noise to you. Or maybe it's just something you watch with just interest, but you're not really using it for advice because you know this is the type of investor you are. So again, this part of the PRISM process is giving you that clarity. A large part of PRISM really is helping you have that clarity, that path that you want to be on to reach your own goals. So Bob and Jane, so when they go through and actually write down what their preferences are, in this case, they describe themselves as a combo investor because they do have some investments that are not targeted towards a grandchild that they like to invest in individual stocks. We can say Bob, you know, likes to roll up his sleeves and be that stock picker. But in this case, because their goal is funding their child's college education and because they're using 529 plan, they're going to say, you know what, we want index funds if they're available in that fund. But if it's not available, then they'll go for the lowest cost option available. But the other thing they're writing on their plan is, you know, thinking about professionals, they're thinking about working with a professional. Some of you might actually use an advisor. We know about 30% of AAII members work with an advisor. In this case, they're making note of that because they want to make sure that their grandchildren, if their grandchildren are eligible for financial aid, they want to make sure that anything they do doesn't interfere with that. So they're making note of that, that they may consider working with a professional in this scenario to make sure that their desire to help out doesn't cause unintended consequences. In this case, interfering with financial aid. So just making note of that. And keep in mind, when we talk about about using the services of a professional, realize it does not necessarily have to be an advisor or planner. You could say, I may want to work with a lawyer in terms of estate planning. Perhaps your goal has tax implications, or perhaps there's tax implications that influence how you manage your portfolio. We want you to just jot that down so it's clear about what you're doing. But the hidden thing about this is that if you think about in terms of legacy planning, and say perhaps keeping your spouse or your significant other informed, or helping your children or grandchildren understand what your goal is, while you're going through this whole process, you're now creating a plan you can actually share with them and saying, not only this is how I invest, this is who I work with, and this is why I work with that person. So we're actually also secretly giving you a conversation starter and really a framework you can have some deep conversations with those you love. So there is an additional benefit to going through the PRISM process. But I digress. Now, again, the key constraints we said for Bob and Jane is their 529 plan, which limits their investment options. And as I said, they may, in this case, they know they want to work with a financial planner or financial professional who's very well schooled in college finances, but they may also want to consider consulting with their estate attorney, if they're concerned about gifting or if they're concerned about other issues that might affect a long-term estate plan. So sometimes things you do, particularly in terms of trying to help out, can have implications with other part of your financial plan. So again, think through those things as you're creating your plan and write them down so you don't overlook them, you don't miss them, and you don't create unwanted headaches trying to do one thing, but obviously that might have implications for other things. So now you get down to selecting your investments. And the reason why we don't have selecting investments beforehand is hopefully you're seeing that these other decisions lead up to it. Your choice of allocation, what constraints you might have, what preferences you might have. This narrows the process down. So if you think about investing from a high level, there's about 5,000 publicly traded stocks. There's about 30,000 mutual funds and ETFs, and we haven't got to all the thousands of bonds, let alone all the other assets that are available to you. So that's a huge amount, but we've just now narrowed down that whole universe to a much more manageable list by really crossing out everything you're not going to consider and really shining a light. So we cross out everything you don't want to consider. And now we're shining a light on a certain parts of the market and the certain parts of the investment arena you do want to focus on. So going through those other 3 steps has made step number 4 a lot easier and much simpler to implement. So let's work for Bob and Jane. So they said their goal again is paying for their college education. And I would point out that in this case, we start off with this. So when you're selecting investment, that goal is front and center. And so in this case, what are the rules? Well, they're going to use a 529 plan, so they actually have to use mutual funds. And so their goal is to really favor broad-based index funds if available. They actually have a preference for those types of funds. But they realize in the 529 plan, they may not have that option of choosing index funds. So in this case, they say, okay, if they're not available, let's use the lowest cost active funds. And what I'll say, if you're a mutual fund investor and you're looking at active funds, low cost matters, because that's the one thing you can actually control. And for every increment of higher cost an active fund charges over an index fund, the active manager has to achieve that much more in return just to get you even with the performance of the active fund. I'm not saying active funds cannot perform. There are some that do, but it's very hard to pick out which funds those are without the benefit of hindsight. And so the only thing you really have to go for besides the past performance record is that expense ratio. Now, in this case, in terms of what they're going to look at in terms of funds, in this case, they want to diversify. Based on their asset allocation approach, they decide they want to have large cap, mid cap, preferably value if it's available, and international. So they're going to actually, in this case, Bob and Jane, they're going to get kind of aggressive, and they're going to make it very easy, 25% in each of those 4 funds. Now, you all might like this right mix and change up the mix, maybe not do 25% in each, maybe do something else. Maybe you want to have a small cap value tilt. Maybe you want a large cap growth tilt. That's fine. The idea, though, is you're running it down. What are you going to look at? What specific asset classes are you going to look at? So in this case, when they sit down and they look at this plan of the offerings in the 529 plan, they're not looking at the bond offerings. They're not looking, say, at the emerging market offerings. Again, this process is simpling down. So they can look at this and say, okay, they can look at this document and say, okay, let's go to large cap stocks. Let's pick one. Let's go back to the mid cap stocks. Let's pick one. Again, it's simplifying the process by making you more focused. And they also wrote down, what are the rules? What are they going to use to judge whether or not those funds stay in their portfolio or not? So again, they're looking for either returns are close to or above the category average. And if the returns are below a certain increment for a certain period of time, those are the rules they're going to use to sell the fund. Now, your self rules might be different, and that's fine, but write them down, because if you write them down and then you refer to them every time you engage with your portfolio, you're going to make better decisions. And with our own portfolios at AAII, with our shadow stock portfolio, with our stock superstars, which are VMQ, our dividend investing, our growth investing, all those portfolios have written buy and sell rules. And when we sit down and discuss portfolio actions of the portfolio, we question each other. Someone brings up a reason for a sell, and they're not specific to those rules. We start asking them, how does this fit in the rules? And why do you want to vary from the rules in this instance? So we hold each other accountable. And you really see this in the performance of the shadow stock portfolio. The reason why it's performed so well over the long term is not only the strategy of following and investing in small cap value stocks, it's because Jim Clunan and now John Bykowski have followed those shadow stock rules routinely over and over and over. That rinse and repeat might be boring, but it works incredibly well for keeping you disciplined. Now, keep in mind, again, we give you some buy and sell rules, but your specific buy and sell rules will vary based on what you're doing, what types of assets you're holding, what kind of strategy you're following. And again, the strategy might vary. So if you're using technical analysis, a very different set of sell rules than if you're buying and holding mutual funds or ETFs. But again, you may also have constraints that govern your buy and sell rules. Perhaps you're working for an employer that puts restrictions on how often you can trade. That will influence your buy and sell rules. And again, if there's any constraints on your ability to buy and sell, perhaps you have a mutual fund that has an end load to it and you can't sell it for X number of days or X number of months. That plays a role into your buy and sell rules. And so once you implement all this, the final process is monitoring. And I'll talk about monitoring a bit in the January AAII journal. But when we talk about monitoring, it really is three aspects: your allocation, your progress, and your life stages. So monitoring isn't my portfolio balance is X and it was Y before and Y was higher than X, and so now I'm disappointed. It really is taking a look at your plan and are you on track, and has your goal changed? Or has your portfolio, are you on track, but your portfolio is skewed off from your target allocation? So let's walk through this. It starts off with monitoring your allocation. Once you establish your allocation, and if your allocation is still valid, then you should try to make sure your portfolio is relatively close to it. Now, you do want to allow some variance because investing is messy, and your portfolio will rarely be exactly what your allocation says it should be. So give it a little bit of room, but what you don't want to do is have your portfolio go so far away from your allocation, it's no longer correct. It no longer matches what you originally designed. So for instance, in this case, we said Bob and Jane are allocating 25% to 4 different asset class categories. So perhaps they wake up one day and they look at the portfolio and they find out instead of having 25% in large cap stocks, they have, say, 30% in large cap stocks, so 35% in large cap stocks. Well, that isn't their allocation. They didn't allocate to have 35% in large cap stocks. They allocated to have 25% in large cap stocks. So when they see that variance, they want to adjust their portfolio back. They want to rebalance to bring their allocation back closer to in line. Now, how often should you rebalance? There's debate about it, but a lot of studies have suggested, a lot of experts suggest using collars. Vanguard suggested when your portfolio is more than 5 or 10 percentage points off target, then rebalance. And you can do that either annually or semi-annually. And when it comes to rebalancing, you can either sell some of the assets that are overweighted, or alternatively, if you're a saver, you can orient your savings towards your portfolio, but you have to realize, depending on your size of your portfolio, that may not be enough. Or if you're in the withdrawal stage, you can actually target withdrawals from the over-allocated asset class or asset class category. But again, you do need to consider the size of those withdrawals relative to the size of your portfolio. You may have to actually go through the process of selling some of the assets that's overweighted and taking those proceeds and allocating them into the asset that's underweighted. The other thing is you want to monitor your life stage. Has something changed? For instance, in this case for Bob and Jane, they find out that one of their grandkids, is a musician, extremely talented. And they find out this grandchild hits age 16. They end up on a show like The Voice or something else, and they decide, you know what, forget college, I'm going to go be a rock star. And that might be their calling, and they might sell millions of albums, or I guess I should say they're having their songs streamed millions of times on Spotify and Apple Music, because that seems to be how things go now. Well, in that case, there's a change in there. But again, they might have a situation where they're blessed with another grandchild, or perhaps their health deteriorates, or God forbid, something happens to the grandchild. So in essence, life happens. And as life happens, your goals might change. And so you want to, about once a year, just go through this. Think about what possibly has changed in your life and does it affect your goals. And if something happens that does affect your goals, then go back to the whole PRISM process and update it. Your goals change, obviously has implications. But the idea is, we don't want you to just think about your portfolio, but think about, are your goals still relevant? Are your goals still applicable? Or has something changed that would cause you to adjust your goals? And if so, then obviously that affects the rest of your portfolio. So in this case, for Bob and Jane, we assume they recently completed their PRISM plan and they recently retired. So you see a lot of no's, but there might be some yeses in this. And so go through it. Now, the final thing is monitoring your process. And we have a spreadsheet that you can actually use. And so the idea is on this worksheet, you're going to enter in numbers. And it works if you're in the withdrawal stage or if you're in the accumulation stage, meaning you're saving. In this case, we set up for the withdrawal stage. And what this is asking you, okay, how much do you have right now? What's your assumed rate of return? And then what do you assume your portfolio is going to be worth at that date? So we did for one grandchild here. So we assume for their older grandchild, they're going to allocate $27,500 in savings. They're basically setting aside $45,000 for both grandkids. They're going to assume they're going to give an 8% return per year. And this is just a moderate return. You can change it to whatever number you like. But in 8 years, that's going to equate to about $50,000 in wealth. So now we're going to assume, okay, the older grandchild's going to get through college within 4 years. They're going to assume during that withdrawal stage, they're going to invest pretty conservatively. So they're going to assume a 3% return over that period. But they're going to figure each year they're going to contribute $12,500 to that grandchild's college expenses. So based on this, and then they're also going to assume if the market really crashes, they might be at risk of a 40% withdrawal stage. Now, they're going very conservative, so that might be kind of aggressive for the allocation, and that number can change. But what this does is actually shows them, okay, what is the variance in returns and how much of a drawdown can they expect? And so what you'll see this in a January issue. So what this tells you is your portfolio might be down, but may not necessarily be out. So if your portfolio is dropped, but it's not down to that, what you assume is a worst case drop in your portfolio, it tells you that if you have enough time to allow your portfolio to recover, then you're going to be okay. And so the whole idea really with investing is if you do have this long tail spending, or you still have enough time before your goal is reached and the market drops, you still might actually be on track to reach your goal. Now, obviously, if your time period is short and you have a huge drop, or you've dropped below that worst case drawdown, or you find out what your assumed worst case drawdown is not enough, then you might need to make some adjustments. You may need to postpone your goal. You may need to save more. You might need to withdraw less. We'll get to this in a January journal. But this gives you an idea that once you start factoring in volatility and fluctuations into your portfolio based on your valuations, it's not a matter of monitoring what your balance is. It's a question of looking at that balance into perspective of what you might expect. And those of you who have read Jim Clunan's Level 3, this is an adaptation of a spreadsheet included in his book. And the spreadsheet is actually in the PRISM Academy with instruction on how to use it. So it's a very helpful tool to help you understand where your current portfolio balance is relative to what you should expect given the assumed volatility, assumed possible drawdown for your allocation chosen. And the one thing I will say again, understand as you go through this, if there's a major change when you go through this monitoring process, think about what you do to either get yourself back on track or whether or not your goal makes sense. And you may find out that a goal that you thought was aspirational is now reachable, or maybe a goal you thought was really important suddenly is a little bit out of reach, at which point you need to decide, is this goal negotiable or not? And what steps can I do to achieve it? And what do I need to do differently? But now again, we showed you through this process, really, we showed you a couple who wants to help out their grandkids' college education. And I want to say on here, it was just one example, and that PRISM itself is very personal. It's very personable, and it's very flexible. So when you go through the PRISM process, it's a framework. And when you go through it, your PRISM process might look very different than what I showed you here. And you might find things you might want to add. You might find things you want to delete. That's fine. We're giving you a framework and we're giving you the steps to create your own plan. We want you to personalize it and create it in a way that makes sense for you, but we also want you to make it incorporate in your investing process. We want this to be an ongoing process and have it evolve as your life evolves. It's never meant to be, here's the box, use it works for everybody. It's more, here's the canvas, now go create, and we'll give you guidelines, but go create the path, the painting that helps you reach your goals. And Jenna, why don't you tell them a little bit about the PRISM Academy? I know I've referenced it a little bit, but why don't you tell our attendees about it?
Yeah, definitely. So the PRISM Academy is an online interactive experience. So basically you log in with your AAI credentials. The best way to access it is like, we've sent Charles has mentioned it, and then I've sent it a couple times in the chat, but it's AAII.com/learn-and-plan. That's where you can actually see the full syllabus. So that's the full syllabus of each of the 5 steps. Each step has, several lessons underneath it, with corresponding worksheets, interactive discussions. You can share, you can read what other people have posted. A lot of people, there's a lot of comments in the in the very beginning on prioritizing your goals, where people are sharing, the types of goals that they were and that were in their top 3. What kinds of things went through their mind when they were prioritizing these goals, and so on. So you can really get a perspective, from people across the nation, all different kinds of AAII members at different parts of their life, different life stages, different goals, different risk tolerance, and you can kind of connect with those people and learn from those, and then draw your own conclusions, based on reading the material, going through the worksheets, all of the worksheets that Charles, that you went through today, in today's presentation. You can access those in the PRISM Academy. You're able to fill them out, download them. You can print them out to have a physical copy with you. You can also ask questions. The nice part is that Charles and I, we're always on the PRISM Academy. So if you send us a question on there, we're able to answer you, pretty promptly. So if you're going through your wealth building plan, going through the lessons, and just have a couple questions here and there, we're happy to answer as well. So that's a great way to get in touch with us, and get your answers, very so you understand, what if you're held up on a certain area, if you have questions on how to proceed because of a life stage that you're recently just got into, or a new goal, like Charles was saying, a new goal of trying to pay off your grandchildren's debts, or college education, or anything. Then that's a great way to kind of delve in there. So that gives a little bit of a background, but you can, I'll put the links again in the chat section, but you'll be able to find them in the handouts as well. So if you want to go into there later after the presentation, feel free to jump right in.
Excellent. Thanks, Jenna. Are there any questions at all I can answer?
Now, looks like, yeah, if anybody has any questions, you can throw those in the question section of your go-to webinar control panel, or you can also message us. We'll be able to answer any questions you have even after the presentation. You can post them in, like I said, community, or you can just email them. You can email members@aaii.com, and we can answer those as well after the presentation. I think most people, there's a couple questions on just when the recording will be posted. So we'll basically, we do a little light editing process, have some graphics and things like that. But so you'll be able to access it on our YouTube page tomorrow, like afternoon, evening. Usually we try to aim for like 3 p.m., 4 p.m. Central at the very latest. And then those we'll also have the handouts. So Charles, the slides and handouts, those will be linked. And then everybody who registered or attended tonight's presentation will also get an email with the on-demand webinar and the slides as well. Just a lot of people saying thanks for a great presentation, and they were happy that they didn't miss out on this webinar event. So thank you so much, Charles, for delving into everything.
Oh, thanks everybody for attending. I'm glad they found it useful. It's always good.
Yeah. Let's see. I think, yeah, if we don't have any questions right now, but if anybody has any, let's see. Yeah, you can just message us, and yeah. So Charles, I wanted to thank you, but if you did you have any last words that you wanted to share with the group?
Yeah, I have a few final thoughts. I talked to Prism about being a framework and stuff. You know, we don't. I would just say, if I were to give everybody one takeaway, don't underestimate the power of just writing things down. And the example I always use are checklists. And checklists have been shown to work across really, I mean, not just industries, but really across fields, medicine, aviation, investing. And really, President really kind of gives you that checklist of what you're going through, but it also helps you think about the purpose behind it. But if you don't go through, you don't want to get this whole thing of President like, oh my gosh, it's a lot. I don't want to write down that much. But if you just sit me on a simple sheet of paper, here's my goal, here's my allocation, here are my rules. Here's what I want to monitor. That alone, if you do it on a single sheet of paper versus just using all our worksheets, I think you'll find out you'll make better investing decisions, and you won't be glued to the TV when things are happening in the market. You won't be trying to watch some pundit trying to tell you what to do. It works amazingly well. And if I would just give people an idea of just how effective simple things are, this is from a book called A Checklist Manifesto, and the rock band Van Halen. They were famous for not requiring mandating, I believe it was, no green M&Ms in your candy jar. And for years, everyone's like, well, that's a really weird request. But David Lee Roth, in an interview, once explained, the lead singer of Van Halen, explained in an interview they had a very complex setup, and they used to get to a lot of smaller cities and smaller markets where the staff of the arenas didn't have experience doing it. And so they used it as a test, because if they found green M&Ms, it was a sign those people probably didn't read through all the contract, and then they knew they had to go through everything. And so when you write down your process and you refer back to it as you're going through things, is that reminder of, am I doing things right? Am I considering the right things? Am I making the right decisions for my goals? Or am I finding that proverbial green M&M? I need to stop and think about, what am I doing? And so, like I said, PRISM gives you a great framework, and you can use that again. Use our worksheets, take advantage of them. Or if you want to use the 5 steps themselves and then just create your own version of it, that's great too. But really think about writing things down. I think you'll find out it gives you a lot of control, a lot of clarity, and it will help make you a better investor.
100%. No, I mean, I honestly, just to kind of reiterate, when I went into the community and started going through the PRISM Academy and all of the different steps and everything, I give actually Charles and I both gave individual personal examples of how we even go through it, so you can check those out there. But it really helped even me kind of as an individual investor starting out, being able to formulate a real plan that can help me, especially with having a long, a very conservative, or not, sorry, an aggressive risk tolerance, being able to actually see that on paper and have that with me, that actually gives me a little bit more direction in the way that I make my decisions and everything. So even I've definitely found it very valuable. And if people want to go in there and see, specific examples, you can definitely do that as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'll just, I start with the analogy of running, so I guess I'll end it with the analogy of running. I was training for the marathon. I had a training plan in my wall, and for 5 months, I knew exactly what workout I was going to do every day. And did I make modifications along the way? Yes, I did. But how do you actually run a marathon? Well, you build up your endurance. And how do you build up your endurance? You have a plan. And it's the same thing with investing. How do you build a fortune? Well, you start with a plan to start saving that first dollar and build upon it. And you have a plan for managing your investments and for monitoring your portfolio. Again, like I said, it works across fields.
It does. It does. Well, thank you so much. I want to give a big thank you to Charles for delving into how to apply the PRISM process, because we've talked about, we've had webinars for each step, going from step 1 to step 5, and then we even came back to step 1 to show how you kind of use it in a cyclical process. But now, we have an actual, a hard example of how to, achieve your financial goals and how to go through this process, and understanding how to effectively plan so you can become a more confident individual investor. So I do want to reiterate, though, that all lessons for each of the 5 steps of PRISM have all been released online and can be accessed via the community platform. So we have numerous interactive worksheets, like I said. We have videos, lessons you can use as you progress through each step. And so you can find the worksheets as well as participate in the activities within the online PRISM Academy community by going to AAII.com/learnplan. And like I said, you can view the full syllabus there and enroll in the online PRISM Academy. And I do want to thank you, everyone, for attending tonight's event. Lastly, I want to mention again that this presentation is recorded and a replay of the webinar will be available tomorrow on AAII's YouTube channel, along with links to this presentation's handouts, as well as any resources that we discussed tonight. And before we wrap up, I do want to also kind of mention that you can join the online PRISM Academy plus countless special interest groups that we call SIGs on various investment topics such as retirement withdrawals, income investing, allocation strategies. We even have a new options trading, investment trading strategies, as well as also your local AAII chapters on the online community platform. So you can visit community.aaii.com and log into your AAII account to get started. And yeah, with that, we wish all of you viewing good health, good fortune, and a great rest of your evening. Thank you and take care.
Thank you, everybody, and happy holidays.